it's always valuable to fight for democracy, even if you lose. Okay? You know, we don't have to win to fight. What happened in Mexico was kind of Florida con salsa. You know, it's Ohio goes south of the border. Some of the same exact tricks that were used in the U.S. elections were used south of the border. And more importantly is that some of the tricks south of the border, I'm sure, will be imported north. Supposedly, Felipe Calderon of the ruling party,
Right.
the National Action Party, defeated Lopez Obrador of the Democratic Revolutionary Party
Right.
by less than 0.5% of the vote.
Sounds familiar.
And so what's happened is, you know, but they don't have, by the way, an electoral college. It's pure plurality. Now, it was less than 250,000 votes. But we saw, for example, nearly 1 million votes, 903,000 votes, which supposedly were unreadable and were tossed out. Now, almost all those votes, once again, what we call in the U.S. spoiled votes, which in the U.S. happen to be Democratic votes cast by minority voters. Same thing in Mexico, that these were Lopez Obrador voters who cast ballots. Now, in the Mexican elections, there's no such thing as not choosing a presidential candidate if you cast your ballot, because there's only one race on the ballot. If you don't want to vote, you throw away your ballot. This meant they supposedly had paper ballots, by the way, so if people marked their ballots, folded them up, put them in the box, and yet they said these ballots were unreadable or they couldn't figure them out. And Mexican ballot is intensely simple. In fact, it's a good one as a measure for what we ought to have in the U.S. But it also shows you that even with a paper ballot, you can't necessarily get a fair election. Mexico has never had a fair election, ever in its entire history. And this election was no different than any other. Okay, and this idea that, well, we have to be careful about Mexico's nascent democracy. Counting the ballots is the sign of democracy. Not counting the ballots is the sign of dictatorship. Or in the case of Mexico, plutocracy of a small, wealthy elite. So you had nearly 1 million votes, 4 times the plurality of the supposed winner, uncounted. You also had an extraordinary non-turnout of voters in Acapulco, which is in the state, in that region, in Guerrero State.
Right.
Now, that is the state in which the challenger, Lopez Obrador, had the highest level of support anywhere, and yet it had the lowest turnout anywhere. So the highest level of support with the lowest supposed turnout. Maybe the ballots weren't counted, okay? And you had and the other thing was massive intimidation in that state, which is a very populous state. You had a gang war, gunfire. You had 2 poll workers murdered that morning. Wow. So this was, talk about voter suppression, done with bullets. In the northern, now you have to understand, they said, oh, there are poll workers. That is, people are chosen by lottery in their areas to become poll workers. You don't have a choice. It's like becoming a member of a jury in a U.S. courtroom. Right? You're chosen by mail. However, these are in states in which there is absolutely lockdown control, plantation style, by the Calderon supporters in the north of Mexico. If you're a poll worker, first of all, if you're picked randomly, you're probably a Calderon supporter to begin with. And secondly, and if you weren't, God forbid, in a state like Sonora or elsewhere, or Baja California, that you would dream of challenging a vote and saying, hey, they're stuffing the ballot boxes. That's a good way not to make it home that night. Okay, they don't mess around in Mexico. This is voter suppression of a bloody order. Really? The other thing is that it is unbelievably easy to stuff these ballot boxes. They're just cardboard boxes with slots in the top. And even if you have poll workers who are honest and want to watch it, the problem is that because people can simply throw away their ballots, no one kept track of ballots counted and uncounted. So there were literally millions of blank ballots sitting around.
Wow. You
know, that you could just pick up, fill out, and stuff into the box if no one was watching or if someone was on your side. Remember, the problem of having poll watchers picked randomly is that doesn't mean that there are people who really give a shit whether that box has been stuffed or really want to put their life or their work or anything else on the line to stop you from doing it. Who's going to stop you? Okay, who's going to stop you? So you have a problem that Mexican elections have never been honest, not close to honest. I don't think they've had the actual winner of election chosen in many, many years. And it's interesting, of course, that Vicente Fox, who won, is the person who screamed most about the methods used in Mexico for stealing elections. And suddenly he's claiming, oh, it's suddenly clean and clear. Nothing has changed in Mexico. It's definitely gotten worse. And plus, we saw, in addition, unbelievably anomalous count of the vote, because the results come in precinct by precinct randomly throughout the nation. Now, if you know anything about statistics, if your votes are coming in randomly across the nation,
right,
then you should roughly see the same margin of vote all through the night as the votes come in. Well, Lopez Obrador was winning just as the exit polls showed. Again, we have, just like in the U.S. where the exit polls showed John Kerry winning, but somehow George Bush won. Same thing in Mexico. Exit polls showing Lopez Obrador, the challenger, beating the ruling party. All the vote is coming in with that 2% margin all night. And the very last 2 hours, suddenly, Calderon's vote goes up, shoots up enormously. And when I say it shoots up enormously, suddenly you're getting precincts at the end with 25, 35, 45 to 1 at the very end, which suggests that maybe as they were seeing their candidate lose, the only conceivable explanation is that as the ruling party saw their candidate going down, they took those empty ballots. They had precincts where they had absolute control. They knew that they needed so many precincts. They figured out how many votes they needed, and they literally just stuffed those ballots. There is zero other reasonable explanation for that really anomalous, absolutely unbelievable change in the tallies at the end of the polling. Okay, Lopez Obrador is the un-Gore. He has refused to give in, to grab his ankles and say, this is democracy. He's had demonstrations of 100,000 to 500,000 people.
It's amazing.
And had people march from all over the country. Now, what he was afraid to do was any type of serious civil disobedience, because the last time that happened was when his party absolutely won over the ruling party back in I think it was '88. And those will forgive me if I don't have the years all correct. But it was when Cuauhtemoc Cardenas actually defeated the PRI ruling party. But in that case, there was civil disobedience, and the 500 of the challenger supporters were murdered. 500 were shot down. So protesting in Mexico is not so easy. So Lopez Obrador has only gone so far. And therefore, he's had to make a decision to keep it peaceful. The problem of keeping it peaceful is that they're not going to overturn the election that way, because the ruling party doesn't care how much you protest. They don't care how much you stop traffic in Mexico City. And frankly, they wouldn't care how many of you get shot anyway. So the ruling party is not going to give up their privileges. And when we talk about ruling party, they have their Uncle Sam will make sure that the rulers continue to rule. Because you have to understand that Mexico is the #2 source of imported oil into the United States. And we're not going to, so you have to understand this once again as part of the international oil gang war. And there's no way that the Bush administration in particular is going to let a hostile party win an election south of the border, sitting on top of what they see, what the Bush regime sees as our oil. Luis Mendoki has been documenting the theft of the election there. And I mean, the stuff was obvious and in our face, very much. But we shouldn't think of, oh, those Mexicans, another banana republic election. This was done Bush style. The methods used, the spoiled votes, the intimidation of voters, the missing ballots were all done as we've seen in the U.S. The one advantage, though, that the Mexican elections have, where you could see it being stolen, is that at least the challenger could demand a recount because they were paper ballots.
Right.
If it was electronic voting, you can't recount electrons.
Right.
So at least there was a chance to protest and to make a case and demand the ballots be counted. They didn't succeed, but at least there was a fighting chance. Once they moved to electronic voting, it's over. It's always valuable to fight for democracy, even if you lose. Okay? We don't have to win to fight. You know, I mean, if we had that attitude, we'd never win.
Right.
You know, I'm not a believer in being a beautiful loser, but I do believe that you can't tolerate this idea that, for example, when Al Gore said that he had to choose between his personal ambition and democracy, and democracy, as if counting the votes were anti-democratic. First of all, they weren't his goddamn votes to not count. They're mostly the votes of minority voters. In fact, I don't even know why there was a case called Bush v. Gore for the vote in Florida in 2000, because George Bush and Al Gore were not voters of Florida, and it was not their damn votes at stake. They should not have been before the Supreme Court. It was the voters themselves who were getting shafted. That's the issue. And therefore, it also shows something else. You can't necessarily wait for a leader to show up. In Mexico, the opposition and the pro-democratic forces, those for counting the votes, had a leader in the opposition candidate, Lopez Obrador. We don't have that in the U.S. Don't expect it. You have to do it yourself. Go door to door. Tape the images on people's TV screens over Katie Couric's face. Whatever's necessary. Okay? You're going to... Look, they stole the vote in Ohio in 2004, Florida 2000. 2006 and 2008 is the story of the theft of the Hispanic vote in the West. That's where you got to go. Okay. That's what has to be documented. And stop looking only for the computer vote theft. It's much simpler. It's old-time methods. Bad voting machines, voter intimidation, and the new gimmick, voter ID. The only people who get ID'd have the names Rodriguez and Hernandez. Those are the people that are getting nailed for their ID. And it's not to stop illegal immigrants from voting. They don't vote for a good reason. They go to jail, they get caught, they get thrown out. We don't have cases of people falsely using ID. We do have cases of people wrongly being stopped from voting because they didn't show up with the right ID. And they're always the same color, brown. How do I get confidential information? As that great investigative journalist Yogi Berra once said, it's amazing what you can see when you look. So you got to look for it, you got to ask for it. And so join me in the Armed Madhouse, www.gregpalast.com if you want to see the stuff you're not supposed to see. Catch you there.